Hello there, and on this video I would like to talk about one of the great progressive rock bands, one of the great heavy rock bands of all time, Rush. And I did plan on doing my 10 favourite albums as a ranking and talk about them, but when I started to think about it, it actually became very difficult for me to actually create a ranking. And what was also very interesting was when I did get my ranking, it fell into an order that was very predictable, which you will see why I'm laughing in a minute. So let's take this another way. Let's have another journey into Rush from my own personal point of view. This is going to be a very personal view on Rush from me, a drummer and a progressive rock musician. That's what the style I have worked in for the last few years. So I got into music originally because of bands like Iron Maiden and Motorhead, Judas Priest, and then Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath. Your typical kid sort of, not really liking pop music that all your mates are into, and then discovering all these heavy rock and heavy metal bands. And when that happened for me, it was right around the time of the emergence of the new wave of British heavy metal. So there's a really exciting scene emerging. And when you get into that, you start to see lots of other rock bands mentioned. You start to, discover all these different sort of heavy rock acts that are out there, like Saxon and UFO and all this sort of stuff. And one of the bands that was featured in Kerrang a lot was Rush. So I just thought, this is another heavy rock band. And so this is around about, I think about 1981. I'd been into heavy metal for a year or so. And I thought, I'll go and buy one of the Rush albums and see what I did. So the new album that had just come out was this one at that time. Rush, Moving Pictures. Now, this was one of those albums. I call these some of these bands gateway bands. I think Rush is the great gateway band. If you're like, I was 12, 13 years old, you're trying to play the drums, and you suddenly come across this album, you're into rock music, you've never heard anything like it in your life, it's just mind-blowing, And I was absolutely ensconced with this band. I thought they were absolutely incredible, and I started to go into their catalogue. And of course, at that point, you can only go backwards, the only album that was out of this and all the albums that went before. The next album I bought after that would be, if I can find it, was this album, 2112. There's a good argument that I sort of bought the two greatest Rush albums ever, when I first got into Rush, and that really coloured my sort of perspective of Rush. I thought they were absolutely incredible band, doing something that I'd never heard before. They were mixing rock with what was progressive rock. I didn't know what progressive rock was, but also the lyrics were so much deeper than anything I'd ever come across on a rock album. And I eagerly awaited the next album to come out, which was Signals. By the time Signals came out, I was a big Rush fan. And they'd shifted their style a little bit by Signals. I loved it. I thought Signals was an absolutely incredible album. I absolutely loved it. And by that, I'm the biggest Rush fan in the world. Then they brought out Grace Under Pressure. Now, I was a huge Police fan, but I can remember thinking, they've stopped being Rush and now they're sounding a little bit more like the Police. Why have they stopped sounding like Rush? And I really liked Grace Under Pressure, but I was a bit concerned that it didn't actually deliver what Rush delivered for me. The album after that was Power Windows, which I didn't like that much, and then it was Hold Your Fire, and I really didn't like that album, and I stopped listening to Rush, and I never listened to them again. Zoom forward many years, I'm in Montreal, playing for a progressive rock band called IQ, and we get an invite to go and see Rush play in Montreal, and I'm a huge Rush fan, so we go across. It's really incredible. We meet all the crew. And they take us backstage, and I'm allowed to go on stage before the audience came in, and I was taken behind Neil Peart's kit, and I didn't actually sit on it. I felt that was too disrespectful, but I sort of stood behind his kit looking around going, oh my God, this is Neil Peart's drum kit, and I sat down and watched the gig, and it was the first time I'd heard any new material after Hold Your Fire. When they went very keyboardy, after that they brought an album out called Presto, which some of my friends said, they've gone back to playing the guitar, they're back doing their old thing. So I went and checked out Presto, but I didn't like it. Because for me, what I liked about Rush was the weird stuff that they did, and they seem to have stopped doing that. I followed them a little way through, you know, but they seem to have stopped doing what I liked about Rush. So what did I like about Rush? What I liked was making a 10-minute track about flying into the centre of a black hole. That's what I liked. And how did they create the tension? You have this section where the band just drops away, and out of all this swirling mess comes Geddy Lee's incredible bass. And it goes down, bam, ba-da-dum. And there's this big gap. You think, what the hell's going on? Down, down, ba-da-da-dum. Another big gap, what's going on? Bow, down, ba-da-dum. Bow, down, ba-da-bam-bam. Bow, down. And this is an absolutely incredible moment. Like, unlike anything you've ever heard in rock music at all. Really incredible. That's what I loved Rush for, and they weren't doing it, you know. Watching them back in, I think this would have been around about 2008, perhaps, when I was watching them again and revisiting that world. I was struck by the quality of some of the new songs, and going back and checking out, I realised that things on Vapor Trails and Snakes and Arrows, which was the album that was out at that time, and then following up with that, you know, Clockwork Angels, absolutely incredible. I was listening to Clockwork Angels last night, and the first 2 tracks on there, absolutely fantastic tracks, you know. A really high quality, doing all sorts of amazing time signatures and stuff like that, all really great. What I do miss, however, are the big epics and the big prog madness, you know. And what's interesting to me was that the album that I bought, Moving Pictures, has got Camera Eye on it, which is the last of the big epics that they ever did, you know. So how would I rank these albums? Well, I really deliberated about this. And my ranking's very simple, and I could go through it in a minute for you, but it doesn't seem enough to really make a video about. But my 10 favourite albums are the first 10 albums. That's as simple as it is, you know. The least favourite of those, of the first 10, is probably Grace Under Pressure. But because of the age I listened to that, there's tracks on that I really love, because, you know, I listened to them over and over again at the time because I was a bit sort of perturbed by their new direction. So I listened to them so much that, you know, nearly 40 years later, they have an appeal, you know, because they remind me of that time. And it just shows you how this is where music is so personal. You know, music's universal and personal. It's both. And that's the way it is. And this video is really about the personal. It's really about my personal love of Rush. So, number 10 on the list would be Grace Under Pressure, right? Which I have on CD and I haven't bothered to go and get it, so I won't pull that out. And number 9 would be Signals. Those would be the 2 in the top 10 albums, Rush albums. They would be in the top 10. So I love them very much. Singles I really love. After that, you're dealing with, you know, 8 of my favourite albums of all time. You know, 8 albums that really opened me up to all the jazz and fusion and avant-garde and electronica and all the madness that I've pursued over the last 40 years. This really has, the door that opened from heavy rock to that was Rush, you know. And so at number 8, I would probably put the first album. Right now, I have not got the first album. I actually have got this. This is that my mom got me this when I got into Rush. You know, like I said, I bought Moving Pictures, then I bought 2112, and then my mom spotted this for me, and it was like the first 3 albums, right? So this is like one big triple album to me, and those first 3 albums are all melded together. So I never really had the experience of going and buying the first Rush album and going, oh my God, this isn't really a Rush album, where's Neil Peart? That never happened, you know. What I had was the experience of having this album with all these different tracks on, and I could tell there was a difference with the first album. It sounded very Led Zeppelin to me. It was a lot more earthier and bluesy. But, you know, the first album, Here Again, What You're Doing, Working Man, they were some of my favourite Rush songs. You know, so at number 8 I would place the first Rush album, which is very close to my heart, if you excuse the pun. at number 7, I would put Caress of Steel. Caress of Steel's a bit of a troublesome album. Listening to it now, to me, especially on the big sidelong epic, Fountains of Lamneth, it does sound a little bit uneven. They're trying to do an epic and they compositionally don't really know how. So it's basically lots of little tracks, within some cases gaps between, because they couldn't quite arrange those together. But Bastille Day and Necromancer are incredible tracks. Necromancer, for me, listening back now, he's filled out a little bit with jamming. I don't think they quite knew how to do that progressive rock thing and arrange the tunes into bigger tunes, which I think is the failure of Caress of Steel. But it's so brave what they're trying to do on that album, so that would be that's my number 7, isn't it? So and number 6 would be Fly By Night, which I think we're now getting into their absolute classic albums. Anthem, Best I Can, Beneath, Between, Behind, Bytor and the Snow Dog, Fly By Night, In the End, Making Memories, and Riveter. All those 8 tracks are just amazing tracks to me. But especially Anthem. Anthem is the moment where Neil Peart announces himself to the world on drums, and it's up there with some of the great announcements of presences ever on an album. Absolutely incredible. So yeah, I've always seen this as being not right in the top of my very favourite albums, but these 3 albums have always been linked together for me because of this, and they've always been below the classics. But from now on, we just have classics, and I would probably order them now in the order in which they came out. So the next album, the next album is Rush 2112, right? I do love this album. It's not my favourite Rush album. I know for some people this is a definitive album. It's not for me. Again, I did find the sidelong track, the 2112 epic, it starts off with that incredible synth thing, and all that move. I love all that, and then Temples of the Syrinx, Temples of the Syrinx kicks in, and that's absolutely incredible Rush song, and then it all gets a little bit fussy and busy, a little bit for me, if I'm really honest. The composition is held together far more successfully than Fountains at Lamneth. But what really lifts this album for me is side 2, Passage to Bangkok, Twilight Zone, Lessons, Tears, Something for Nothing. They're all absolutely great Rush songs. Then none of these songs are in my top ultimate Rush favourites. But this album is such an achievement. You really got to respect them for following up with what they tried to do with Caress of Steel, because of course Caress of Steel was a bit of a failure. So yeah, that was I really do love this album, and I think for me the great moment of this is the start of 2112, Overture, Temples of Syrinx. All that great bit is absolutely incredible music. The next album is probably and this really is one of my favourite albums of all time. So these last 4 albums are just absolutely brilliant. Is Farewell to Kings. This is where if you're a prog fan, this is where you go to. This is where they are full on prog, and I feel by this point they really know how to do it. Xanadu is a proper epic, which is arranged properly and builds up and does all the things that a prog epic should do. As is Cygnus X1. The 2 epics on here are absolutely incredible. Possibly because they're down at 10 minutes rather than 20 minutes. I think they knew how to do that better. But Farewell to Kings, Close to the Heart, Cinderella Man, and Madrigal. They're all fantastic tracks. Close to the Heart is one of their great pop moments. 2 minutes and 52. There's a lot of stuff on this album. They expand the sort of tonal palette of what they're doing. They expand the virtuosity. Rush. From Fly By Night, Caress of Steel to 2112 to here, it's just getting bigger and more advanced. You can tell they're moving towards something. And where are they moving towards? The next album, which for me is at number 3, Rush, Hemispheres. Farewell to Kings is just one of the great progressive rock albums. and this is even slightly better. One of the great progressive rock albums. It's just an absolute masterpiece. And here, on side 1 with 6X1 Book 2, Hemispheres, 18 minutes, they really finally deliver one of their great side-long epics, which hangs together really well compositionally. When you listen to the way it starts up and the way they slowly move through and bring these themes and open the thing out. I don't think the storyline's quite as good as 2112, but musically for me, it's one of their finest moments. It's a really incredible piece of work that is. And then you go on to side 2 and you have 3 of their greatest songs ever. Circumstances, which is one of their great, again, one of these little pop songs that they do, which is 3 minutes 42 seconds. Then you get The Trees. For me, The Trees is like the definitive Rush track. It's 4 minutes 46 long. It's like a mini epic condensed down. You know, it does everything that, you know, real 70s Rush does in that track. Tells a fantastic story. It builds up, you know, from very tiny acoustic to a great big. It's got a middle section. It's got instrumental sections, all within 4 minutes, right? And then it finishes off with the 9-minute La Villa Strangiato, which is, you know, one of the greatest rock instrumentals ever made. You know, what are the 2 greatest rock instrumentals of all time? They're both by Rush, aren't they? It's this one and YYZ. And La Villa Strangiato for me was a real eye-opener to what musicians could do when I heard that. You know, the fact that 3 musicians, guitar, bass and drums, could produce a sound like that and play at that level. This is a real eye-opener to a musician that's sort of, you know, trying to learn the instrument. So this album is just full of so many brilliant tracks. It's one of the great progressive rock albums, one of the great rock albums of all time. Absolutely love this album. It is slightly surpassed here by this one, Permanent Waves. This is really interesting because a lot of prog bands couldn't deal with the 80s coming. You know, in the end, perhaps Rush couldn't really deal with what was going to happen in the 80s. But at the beginning of the 80s, they really solved it. You know, I think this album is 1980. I think, obviously, you know what's at number 1 now, Moving Pictures. You know, I would say that this and Moving Pictures are 2 of the greatest albums ever made in the 1980s. You know, what they're doing here is they're taking all the Rush stuff that they do, they're not diluting it at all, but what they're doing is they're learning how to now bring it down into a sort of pop song, you know, level. And they're going to do that more and more and more. I believe at some point they're going to actually lose the thing that is Rush, you know, or lose the bit that I like at least. I'm sure in the comments there'll be people arguing with that, but the thing that I like. But, you know, on Spirit of the Radio and Free Will, those are 2 of my favourite Rush songs ever. You know, and a musician, I was baffled by those tunes. I was trying to work out what the hell was going on Free Will. Really incredible virtuosity on that. And then you get another epic, Jacob's Ladder, which is one of the great epics they ever did. And then you turn it over, Entre Deux and Different Strings. Not quite as strong as what we've had on side 1, but really interesting experiments. And then Natural Science, again, one of their great epic tunes. Absolutely incredible. This album is almost perfect, you know, and I'm talking about all the albums ever made now. This album is almost perfect. But for me, this album is perfect. You know, and it's the first one I ever bought. Maybe that's why I love it so much. But I think for most people who love Rush and love rock music and love prog, for many people they'd say the same thing. You know, I was lucky to get this album first because it is one of the greatest albums ever made. You know, Tom Sawyer, Red Barchetta, YYZ, Limelight. Side 1 is like side 1 of Led Zeppelin 4, the Untitled album. You know, it's just monumental. This album is very similar to me to Led Zeppelin 4 in its sort of perfection. You know, 4 tracks on either side, and side 1 just delivers 4 incredible tracks that really take you on a journey. And then side 2, they get a little bit weirder, and they do. But it's got the last ever epic they did, one of their great epics. I think this is probably, in terms of their epics, could it be their best ever epic, The Camera Eye? It's just so sublime. I think if you were going to play it to a non-prog fan, you know, say if you wanted to play a Rush epic to a non-prog fan, you know, so they're not going to get put off by all the weirdness and storytelling and the sort of Dungeons and Dragons and all that bit. I think Camera Eye would be a really great one to play them. It's sort of starts off with a sort of, if my memory's right, it's sort of a camera eye view of New York against a camera eye view of London or England. That's quite an amazing song structure anyway to go with, but especially over a song that's going to last 10 minutes. Really incredible. Then after that you get Witch Hunt, which is a lot more experimental in terms of the sounds they're using. Again, very interesting lyrically, for a young guy, trying to work out what they were on about this. It's very proggy because they're on about a witch hunt, but actually you realise it's a metaphor for the way, sort of totalitarian states can, the way they operate, as is Red Barchetta. That's another one that does that. So there's those references on here. And then we have Vital Signs, which really points to what's going to happen in the 80s over the next few albums. But for me, it's absolutely incredible. They never really surpassed that. So Rush, Moving Pictures, that's my favourite. All the time I'm talking through these albums, I'm aware that Rush occupies such a bizarre space in music. The whole time I was a huge fan, and all my mates are huge fans, you knew that the critics absolutely hated them. They would never get mentioned in the same breath as, the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or Bruce Springsteen. This is a sort of weird teenage boys band, that was up in the corner, and they were a bit were they a bit right wing with their, quoting Ayn Rand and all that sort of stuff. And I think over the last 10, 15 years, just because of the vast army of musicians that owe their careers and what they do and their direction in music to Rush, so many musicians of influence have turned around and go, oh no, this is one of the great bands of all time. It's critically, they finally occupied a space where people have, I think the critics have grudgingly gone, I suppose they must be good because they've been around all this time. But for me, what an achievement. What an achievement for a band to have lasted that long, never compromised themselves, never bowed to commerciality because they felt driven to by the record companies. They followed their artistic nose, and let's respect them for that. Even through the 80s of the albums I'm not so keen on, I knew that they were still, true to what their beliefs were musically, and to have the guts to bring in the concepts and the lyrics and the musical sophistication that they did, but most importantly, to be at the top of the game musically and commercially. When I went to see Rush, they were playing in a huge stadium. There must have been 15, 20,000 people in there to watch them. And this band could do that all over the world in every continent, and did that for 40 odd years. That is a really incredible achievement. And whatever I think about music, however depressing it gets, I always think back to Rush and think, if they could find an audience for music which is this difficult and this critically underrated, and yet never have to compromise what they do, that is an absolutely incredible achievement, and we all need to sort of salute them. A couple of years ago, Neil Peart passing, I think, really shook the music community. We've had a few of these over the last few years. I'd put Alan Holdsworth in there, Eddie Van Halen in there. I think within the jazz community, Chick Corea going this year. But Neil Peart was one of the great shocks, that sort of reverberated across the world when that happened. And people had never heard of Rush were suddenly clicking on Twitter and Facebook and suddenly go, who's this Neil Peart that they're talking about? Who's died? It's a very strange end to the story for me. Neil Peart, who wasn't an original member of the band, sort of came into this band and had such an effect on the band. He had such an effect on drummers. He had such an effect on the way music was made and the direction and subject matter. And he had such an effect lyrically on what you could sing about in a heavy metal band. That is a really incredible achievement for him as well. So I'd like to finish this up, as a little bit of a tribute to Neil. One of the great drummers of all time. I can't think of any drummers that aren't influenced by him in some way. A decent, honest guy, seemed really down to earth. That wasn't there trying to, get in the limelight. That stuck by his guns. And we must mention the Burning for Buddy thing, where he was so generous to take his huge, you know, following in the drum world and trying to direct it to all these incredible jazz drummers, which he did. You know, what a guy, what an amazing band. You know, weren't we lucky to be around at the same time as them and have a band like that to hear? Absolutely love them. You know, surely people, like a lot of people watching this, love them too. You know, so yeah, well done, Rush. Amazing job. If you like this video, you like my little ramblings, please click like, subscribe, and please put your opinion in the comments. You know, I'm really doing this to get, you know, one of the great things about music is being able to have a chat about what binds us together and that what makes us different and how we can all get on, you know, in this safe little place, you know, where we can have an argument of, you know, whether the albums after Grace Under Pressure are any good or not, you know. So, you know, let's have a chat about that. I'm sure you're going to tell me all the fantastic tracks that are out there, you know, on the later albums. And thank you for that. So, yeah, thank you for listening again, and I'll see you soon. Bye.